Ciao.
Immaculate came out in March 2024 to some pretty mixed reviews. The film is about a young American woman who travels to Italy to join a convent only to realize that the convent is up to something evil. I found out about this movie by searching what horror movie should I watch on Google, and while I normally wouldn't watch this movie because I don't prefer religious themed horror films, I gave it a shot because it was tagged as psychological horror and one of my friends was making fun of me for not knowing who Sydney Sweeney is. By the way, I hope you don't care about spoilers because this video has a lot of them.
You're insane.
The first act of the film is pretty in line with what you'd expect. The cold opening features this young nameless nun who's trying to escape the convent, but ends up being captured and buried alive. This sets the tone for the rest of the first act, where Sister Cecilia travels to Italy and meets all of the other nuns and the priest in charge of the convent. And because we already know that these people are up to something, we can feel the tension in their interactions.
You can still go back, and God will forgive you.
I found myself constantly looking for clues and trying to guess what's going on behind the scenes. The film has some nice visuals and camera work, though a lot of the fancy shots feel like they're not adding much. Was it really worth it to set up a whole camera rig just to get these tracking shots of cars driving and people running? As Cecilia learns the ropes, there are these lighthearted montages of her doing chores.
Ciao. Ciao.
And we get juxtaposing scenes of the fun stuff in the day and creepy moments and jump scares at night. I found this part quite entertaining and it felt like there was always something going on. But of course this is all just priming you for the main turning point of the film, which is at the end of the first act when she finds out that she's pregnant despite not having sex.
Have you ever had congress with a man?
Gonna be honest guys, this Immaculate Conception reveal took me by surprise, even though Immaculate is the title of the film. I guess my brain isn't big enough to put these things together. Never mind the fact that the opening shot is of the Virgin Mary. Who would have guessed? Conveniently, I can point to the markers for the first, second, and third acts of the film because they've labeled them as trimesters with these title cards. Thank you very much. There were a couple of things that ruined the immersion for me. One is that all of the young nuns look and talk like supermodels.
I feel honored to serve alongside you.
You're very sweet.
God, my head hurts. Too much blood of Christ.
And I just don't find that believable. And as if that wasn't enough, they work in a steamy bath scene because, well, I guess horror directors are kind of a pervy bunch. The second act is my favorite because it's where things start to happen. The plot really starts zooming along. Cecilia's teeth start falling out. Isabella tries to drown her while she's in the tub. Isabella falls out a window, though she was probably thrown out. Her friend Gwen disappears after speaking out. Cecilia finds a warning message hidden in her room. She finds that the convent was keeping a file on her, including her life history and genetic record, and she sees Gwen get her tongue cut out. The pace of this act is very exciting. Eager to escape, Cecilia comes up with a clever plan to use a dead chicken's blood to fake a miscarriage, so that they'll have to take her to a hospital. And I really like this detail because they had hinted at it a number of times in the film. Dead birds are kind of a recurring motif in this film. There's a scene where the nuns decapitate chickens, and a scene where Cecilia sees a bird crash into the window. They even compare the young victims to birds.
He has a talent, sniffing out broken birds.
It was cool to see that all the dead bird stuff was important to the plot as well, but I was kind of disappointed when nothing really came out of this clever scene. Cecilia just gets hauled back to the convent, as if nothing happened, and that was kind of a bummer.
Will you excuse me, please?
Finally, we get the big reveal that they used the holy nail, which is the nail that they used to put Jesus on the cross, to scrape Jesus's genetic material so that they could artificially impregnate girls in order to bring about a second coming. Did you get all that? This is all revealed at the end of the second act when the priest gives his bad guy tells us his master plan scene. Something cool is that they did hint at this reveal a couple of times in the movie. The priest had said earlier that he was a biologist before joining the church.
My first career was in sciences, biology.
Which makes sense when we find out that he's doing all this work in genetics. We also saw that they were in possession of the holy nail. Then there was this window of time where they presumably did the procedure. Cecilia had drank some wine at dinner, which was drugged. Then she went to the basement where she passed out, and she had a dream where these figures hold her down and stab her in the belly, which mirrors the actual procedure that was happening when she was unconscious. So unfortunately, the third act is where this film kind of falls off for me. Cecilia is basically doomed. She's being held prisoner and she's going to be forced to have the child. How does she get out of it? Well, she just fights back and single-handedly kills all the bad guys. I feel like this is a common ending to a lot of films. I like to call it the Rambo ending because the main character basically becomes a one-man army. Speaking of one-man armies, I put out videos like this regularly, so if you're enjoying this video, go over to my channel and check out my other videos, and subscribe if you want to see more like this. Where were we? Ah yes, Cecilia kills Mother Superior by bashing her head in with a crucifix. She kills the cardinal by strangling him with the rosary that he gave her. And she tries to burn the priest, but ends up stabbing him with the holy nail instead. It's a nice touch that all of the weapons are on point with the religious theme.
Death is a part of everyday life here.
By the way, the final fight happens in the catacombs, which were mentioned earlier in the film.
All of this, it was built on the catacomb of St. Stephen. It's off limits.
Cecilia then gives birth and smashes the baby with a rock. This last scene is probably why a lot of critics love the film. Sydney Sweeney's acting is on point here. These screams of her giving birth are some of the best screams I've heard in movies. It's also pretty disturbing that the baby sounds like a straight up animal. Honestly, cheers to the sound team that put together this final scene, but also minus some points to whoever insisted on this film having foot stuff. What is it with these filmmakers and always including foot stuff in their movies? So, was the movie worth watching? Yes. But really only once. I really liked the main character, and I felt the tension and stress of wondering what was going to happen to her. The pacing was good, it felt like there was always something going on, and the writing was good enough that the reveals were exciting. It's a good script. I totally understand why Sydney Sweeney bought the rights to this script in order to produce the film. It's honestly a pretty interesting story. Once the reveals are gone though, I found that there's not too much keeping me interested. It's a good movie, but I wouldn't say that it's a great movie because there really aren't any scenes that stood out enough to make me want to go back and watch them again. One thing I found interesting when researching is that the original script was about a group of teenage girls, not nuns. It's difficult to imagine how the plot would have worked had the main characters been a regular group of girls. I mean, they do lean into the religious stuff pretty hard, but there are some interesting points made about faith in this film. Cecilia says her parish in the US closed because people weren't attending.
Nothing like that, just low attendance.
She has more faith than the people in the community where she comes from, which was explained by her near-death experience as a child. Then she travels to Italy, and the conflict now becomes that she's surrounded by people who took their faith too far, and they think that they can bring about a second coming by performing genetic experiments on young women. And we see Cecilia's faith challenged in the film, especially in this scene where she tells the cardinal that they're going against God, and he basically just says, "Oh yeah, well, why isn't God stopping us?" Then we get to see Cecilia turn from a docile young woman to a cold-blooded killer. It's good to see that the bad guys got what they had coming, but the final scenes seem to drag on a lot when you're watching it for a second time. Anyways, I'm glad I finally know who Sydney Sweeney is, and a quick shout out to Cecilia for biting off her own umbilical cord. That part was pretty cool. So, do you agree with my takes? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching Scream Notes, and I'll see you in the next one.
Remember, your only job is baby.